I'm going to do a brief profile of someone who I think illustrates the way in which being on the internet drives people slightly mad, especially when it comes to uh, anything to do with former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And I'm going to talk briefly about Charlotte Owen, who is a recently appointed member of the House of Lords in the UK, a Conservative peer. What's interesting about her? There are two things that are interesting about her. One is that she used to work for Boris Johnson. And the other is that she was made a peer when she was just 29 years old, which is very, very young to be a peer. And people have put these two facts together and come to conclusions which are, to say the least, not supported by the evidence. And the reason she's been in the news this week is that she's just recently got another job working at a fairly senior level in a company that Boris Johnson, again, is hugely involved in. But what's interesting about the way in which people talk about her is that because, as I say, she is a young woman who has been given a seat in the Lords, which is unusual for someone of that age, people have jumped immediately to all sorts of interesting conclusions. There are suggestions, incompatible suggestions, that she may be Boris Johnson's daughter, that she may have been in some sort of relationship with Boris Johnson, that there's some sort of nefarious explanation for what's going on. None of which, by the way, I should say, either I am not alleging it, and I do not believe it to be the case, and there isn't any evidence for it whatsoever. I think what it overlooks, all this stuff, is that it is quite common in politics, especially, for relatively young people to come in at a relatively junior level and make themselves indispensable. That's something that we see in all parties. It's something that is a reason behind certain people being elected to office at a relatively young age. And I think that's what's been the case with in this case, because she went from a very junior role with Boris Johnson to a much more senior role with Boris Johnson. She was a special advisor while he was Prime Minister, but doing a lot, by all accounts, of quite important political work, just understanding some of the real political legwork that Boris Johnson himself wasn't prepared to put in. And I don't think there's anything more to it than that. The fact that she was put in the House of Lords at the age of 29 is unusual and probably a misjudgment on Boris Johnson's part, because there's no need for anyone to be in the Lords at that age, and it does raise all those sorts of questions. Someone pointed out actually the other day that there's another young Conservative peer appointed at the same time who's also a special advisor to Boris Johnson, 30 years old, a man called Ross Campsall, who there hasn't been anything like the same level of speculation about, largely because he is not a young woman. A brief plea for people not to assume that young women who get promoted to interesting and important jobs have done anything other than just be competent at their jobs and admired by their bosses, and that might be all that's going on in the case of Charlotte Owen.